Truth Unveiled here, and today we're going to be talking about biometrics. If you don't think they are here, they are here. Yes, the system and technology is here. And I'm going to tell you just how deep this goes and how this relates to mind control UN Agenda 2030. But basically, I'm on The Guardian, and it says biometrics in aid and development game changer or troublemaker. Donors use iris scans and digital fingerprints to deliver aid more effectively to 1 billion people, but there are risks on relying on them too heavily. And this report was released today, actually, but it says if your smartphone requires a fingerprint to unlock it, or if you have cleared airport customs using a retinal scan, you've used biometric technology in some form or another. The use of this technology has made our lives more efficient in many ways, and it is now being used to make the process of delivering aid more straightforward and cost effective, because that's what they want us to believe. In many developing countries, poor documentation is pervasive. Globally, 2.4 billion people are not identified on official government documents. To tackle this identity gap, donors have turned increasingly to iris scans, digital fingerprints, and other forms of biometrics to ensure secure and accurate identification for their citizens, from national ID cards to elections and social welfare payments, Lakia. So far, the Center for Global Development estimates that around 1 billion people in 70 developing countries have taken part in biometric identification programs. As the interest in the potential of such systems to provide efficient and targeted aid grows, biometrics will surely play a key role in the era of what? Sustainable development goals. Where else have I heard that word before? Oh yeah, UN Agenda 2030, New World Order. And it goes on to say how it's highly efficient, according to Andrew Hopkins, Chief of Identity Management and Registration at UNHCR, who says that the technology is being used to register people at refugee camps and monitor accounts so that there is not an overspend on distributing aid. Register people at refugee camps. Which camps? Like FEMA camps, maybe? Interesting. Not only that, but monitor accounts, more like monitor everything and little thing that you do. And it goes on to talk about the report and how they are placing these biometrics all over the place and what the costs may be. Now I'm going to tell you what they're not telling you, which is what they're using these biometrics for. What they're using it for: mind control. They're using it to control and surveil every little thing you do, and it's only a matter of time until they bring it to America. Now, I find it interesting that banks are also a part of this scheme, and I did a report on banking glitches, and you'll see how all of this relates. But basically, the report goes on to say from Mirror, HSBC and First Direct embrace biometric security so you can use your body as a password. Millions of Brits to be able to use their own bodies as a secure password as two of the country's leading banks embrace biometric technology. And it's just interesting because where are they starting? The UK. This was only released a couple days ago. But it goes on to say customers of two household name banks across the UK are set to be able to access their mobile and telephone banking using the unique characteristics of their body. This new technology comes as research reveals that 37% of Brits agree that traditional passwords have become an outdated security measure, and 1 in 3 people will use the same password across most of their accounts. Millions of UK customers are set to be able to access their mobile and telephone banking using the unique characteristics of their own body to verify their identity. HSBC and First Direct are bringing biometric security to the mainstream, announcing the rollout of voice biometrics and Touch ID to their UK customers. And I know that Bank of America had on their app an option where you could identify using some form of biometrics. Now, I don't know whether or not they actually did it, but why am I telling you all this? Because why the push? Why are they doing this? And why are they all saying that, oh, passwords have become outdated and, oh, we don't need passwords anymore when we could just have biometrics? Is there an agenda behind this? Is there an agenda behind these banks? You bet you. And I'm going to let you know just what that agenda is. Now here we are on the BBC, and once again it says HSBC offers voice and fingerprint ID system to customers, and it was reported a couple of days ago. Now what's interesting is, like I said, they're starting in the UK, but it says HSBC is launching voice recognition and touch security services in the UK in a big leap towards the introduction of who? Biometric banking. So we see it's starting with the banks. It's starting with these international globalist programs. It's starting in third world countries, and it's only a matter of time until they bring it to America. But it says the bank says its phone and mobile banking customers will no longer have to remember a password or memorable places and dates to access accounts. Barclays has already introduced voice recognition software, but it is only available to certain clients. But look at this. RBS and NatWest have offered fingerprint technology for the last year. Now, what's interesting, I just did a report on banking glitches and how Barclays, RBS, and NatWest, how these were three of the banks that have, and HSBC as well, how they have been under so-called banking glitches. Is it a coincidence that these same banks that have been under banking glitches, that they would just so happen to be offering biometric technology? Are you starting to see the agenda here? If you have not seen my banking glitch report, please do. Please watch it, because you need to see the real agenda behind these biometrics and what these banks are really getting ready for. You see, the biometrics are for what? Two things. They do two things in one swoop. What do they do? The first thing is, of course, mind control. They can track and surveil your every move. But the second thing is what? To implement this EMP, to implement martial law, worldwide global control. And like I said, it's no coincidence that within a few months of each other, not only are three of these banks, not only were they under so-called banking glitches for test running martial law, but now they're also implementing biometrics and fingerprinting ID systems. Interesting. Here I am at a report from the Hindu, which talks about RFID technology, and this has to do with India specifically, but it says RFID tags made mandatory for transport vehicles in state. Now, it's also interesting, around this same time, I did report on the banking glitches and how one of the banking glitches was in India as well. But basically it says the state government has decided to make it mandatory. Look at this, mandatory for the transporters having operations in Andhra Pradesh to obtain radio frequency identification or RFID tags or any other tracking device. Tracking device. Interesting. The government will forthwith impose hefty penalty of Rs 10,000 or more on the transporters for not obtaining the tag along with the transit pass or tampering the tag. And you don't think this is going to become mandatory everywhere else? You don't think this is going to become a law in both Europe and America and possibly worldwide? Think again. It has decided to levy penalty of Rs 15,000 for each offense of non-production of transport declarations. This forms some of the major amendments proposed by the government in the Andhra Pradesh Value Added Tax Act in 2005. The government is proposed to make non-stoppage of transport vehicles at checkposts as an offense with obstructing the authorities from discharging their duties. The violation could entail compounding fee up to Rs 1 lakh on the transporters, and it goes into the penalties and what else the government has decided to do with tax fees and so on and so forth. But I thought it was interesting that they mentioned what? Checkposts. Checkpoints. So basically what India's going to do is they're going to enact these checkpoints or these checkposts in roads to make sure that vehicles have these identification and these tracking devices. If they do not have them, these transports and these cars and stuff, they will get pulled over and will get an offense on them, and they could be charged up to a ton of money, and especially if they tamper with it as well. These are the penalties, and I'm going to let you know how this relates with America as well, and I'm going to be doing a subsequent video on biometrics and the RFID and how it relates to these FEMA camps and martial law and the so-called pandemic that's going to be hitting America real soon, and how it relates to quarantine. So please stay tuned to that, because this all relates. It all is the same thing. Like I said, I won't get too deep into that. I won't go into detail. Please stay tuned for my video that will follow this regarding the biometrics and what they don't want you to know, because there's so much to talk about with this one little topic. But here I am on the DHS, and I'm talking about Real ID frequently asked questions for the public, because I don't know if you all know this, but But basically, the government has passed it and enacted the Real ID Act back in 2005, and I'm going to tell you what that has to do with you. But basically, it says, what is Real ID? Passed by Congress in 2005, the Real ID Act enacted the 9/11 Commission's recommendation, so controlled solution out of the controlled problem, that the federal government set standards for the insurance or issuance, Slovakia, of sources of identification such as driver's licenses. The act established minimum security standards for state-issued driver's licenses and identification cards and prohibits federal agencies from accepting for official purposes licenses and ID cards from states that do not meet these standards. States have made considerable progress in meeting this key recommendation of the 9/11 Commission, and every state has a more secure driver's license today than before the passage of the act. So basically, what has this Real ID Act have done? It has made state IDs and driver's licenses per state mandatory. Now, like I said, I'm going to be talking about this more in my subsequent video, but honestly, it may sound crazy right now, but I'm just going to let you know what's about to start happening. What's about to start happening is that they're going to require you to show ID from state to state. They're going to require you to start showing ID from, road to road. Literally, you're going to have to show ID just to go to your friend's house. You're going to have to show ID just to go to, a store, literally in the same city. That's what's about to happen. So it goes on to talk about what these Real ID Acts do, and I'm going to sort of go over this more in detail in a second. Interesting about the whole DHS article is the timeline of when they're doing all of this. Now, on January 8th, 2016, which was hardly a month ago, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Slovakia, announced the following timetable for the implementation of the Real ID Act for air travel. Effective immediately, the DHS will conduct outreach to educate the traveling public about the timeline below and continue engagements with states to encourage compliance with Real ID standards. Compliance, as in make it mandatory? Oh, you bet. Let's keep going. Starting July 15th, 2016, please listen up to this. TSA, in coordination with airlines and airport stakeholders, will begin to issue web-based advisories and notifications to the traveling public. Starting December 15th, 2016, TSA will expand outreach at its airport checkpoints, through signage, handouts, and other methods. Starting January 22nd, 2018, passengers with a driver's license issued by a state that is not compliant with the Real ID Act and has not been granted an extension will need to show an alternative form of acceptable identification for domestic air travel to board their flight. To check whether your state is compliant or has an extension, click here. Passengers with driver's licenses issued by a state that is compliant with Real ID or a state that has been issued an extension will still be able to use their driver's licenses or ID cards. Now listen to this one. Starting October 1st, 2020, every air traveler will need a Real ID compliant license or another acceptable form of ID for domestic air travel, and we see that already going on, and it's only a matter of time until they implement this stuff. I believe they're going to implement it sooner, but when you read between the lines of all this, what are they saying? National ID cards, biometrics to be mandatory to even travel anywhere. Why is that? The question is why? Why are they making it mandatory for these ID cards for biometrics? Could it be because of mind control? Could it be because of UN agenda? And could it be because of what they're trying to do, martial law? And like I said, control every little thing you do, surveil any little thing you do. Yes, that is the reason. That is the answer. And like I said, this timeline, see, they just put this here. It's without a question in my mind that they're going to do it much earlier. All they need is another false flag to implement all this even sooner. And you can believe that that is in the works. It's only any day now. Any day you can expect another false flag. But if you don't think that this is going on worldwide, I suggest you think again, because I'm here at the EFF, or the Electronic Frontier Foundation, defending your rights in the digital world. But it basically says mandatory national IDs and biometric databases. Mandatory nationwide ID systems have been implemented in a number of countries. Numbers including Argentina, Belgium, Colombia, Germany, Italy, Peru, and Spain. While these schemes vary by country, individuals are typically assigned an ID number which is used for a broad range of ID purposes. Large amounts of personal data such as name, birth, date, place of birth, gender, eye color, height, current address, photograph, and other information is linked to this ID number and stored in a centralized database. In many countries, such as Argentina, national ID regimes are adopted during what? Military or authoritarian regimes. So more like, false flag operations, like, Sandy hoaxes, like, Paris attacks. Interesting. Let's keep going. National ID cards and the databases behind them comprise the cornerstone in government surveillance systems that creates risks to privacy and anonymity. The requirement to produce identity cards on demand habituates citizens into participating in their own surveillance and social control. What is this relating to? What is this talking about? What is the controlled solution to the problem that they created? The solution is, oh, give everybody national ID cards. But what's going to become the problem to that? The problem to that is now they're going to say, oh, well, because of ID cards and oh, because of now that we can identify every little thing you do, oh, now there's the problem of cyber hacking. Now there's the problem of cyber attacks. Now there's the so-called problem of, well, now so-called terrorists can so-called hack into so-called information systems and so-called use that information for terrorism. And to combat that, well, what are they going to do? They're going to blame that or use that for what? The EMP. Are you starting to see how all of this goes on and how all of this is really starting to make sense? I hope so, because I'm trying to let you know the globalist New World Order agenda through all of this. And it goes on to say many countries are now modernizing their ID databases to include biometric identifiers that authenticate or verify identity based on physical characteristics such as fingerprints, iris, face and palm prints, gait, voice, and DNA, face recognition, RFID technology. While supporters argue that biometric identifiers are an efficient way to accurately identify people, biometrics are what? Costly, prone to error, and present extreme risks to privacy and individual freedom. How are they prone to error? They're prone to error because what? So-called terrorists can hack into the network and they can use that as an excuse to go to war. Oh, and how do they create extreme risks to privacy and individual freedoms? Mind control, government control, UN Agenda 2030, New World Order. They want to watch every little thing you're doing. And that's exactly how they're doing it through spying, mass surveillance program through the NSA and the TSA. That's exactly what they're doing. The controlled solution to the caused problem. I hope you're starting to see this. But basically, the article goes on to talk about biometrics and the national ID schemes and why you should oppose them. But now I want to turn your attention to this article here, according to the New American, and it talks about globalists and UN push mandatory biometric ID for all. Yes, if you do not think that biometrics are going to become mandatory, they are. And so basically it says, in an effort to bring every last person into the system, so to speak, governments, globalist forces, and the UN want to make sure that every human being on the plane has a government-issued ID card complete with biometric data. Indeed, the recently approved UN Sustainable Development Goals. Hey, where else did we see that word? In the Guardian article too. Interesting. Who are they working for? Let's keep going. Also known as Agenda 2030, explicitly calls for legal identity and birth registration for all. And you can look at more of that in the UN Article 16. A parallel effort led by the same forces pushing global IDs, meanwhile, hopes to accomplish cash and move toward a cashless global society in which every transaction can be tracked. And we see that with countries like Sweden. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Sweden is basically 95% cashless, and it's only spreading throughout all of Europe and in America too. And with funding from US taxpayers and various tax-exempt foundations controlled by the establishment, both of those visions could become a reality in the not too distant future, at least if humanity does not push back. And like I said, what is one of the ways that they're going to try to make this mandatory? Through another false flag, through another Sandy hoax. It's only a matter of time until they stage another event to make all this mandatory. Now, some of you might be asking, well, what's wrong with biometrics and what's wrong with getting rid of cash? The problem is that if you get rid of cash, then you cannot control and surveil and monitor people and what they're spending and when they're spending and what they're spending on and how they're spending. That is the push for this. That's the reason for these credit cards. And like I said in reports earlier, these banks are in on this scheme as well. But the report goes on to say the UN's deeply controversial Agenda 2030, marked as an effort of transforming our world, is essentially a recipe for global socialism, as this magazine has documented. Everything from national and international wealth redistribution, sounds like socialism to me, to targeting children as agents of change. I've done a report on how the government's coming after your children through the educational system, is explicitly demanded in the scheme formally adopted by every national government and dictatorship on earth in September. Buried deep within the massive text, which outlines 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 specific targets, is another key piece of the globalist puzzle. By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration, reads Target 16.9. That is actually what is said in the UN. That is what the UN has said. In other words, the UN and its member regimes are practically putting a bullseye on the back of every human being who still exists outside of the globalized economic and political system, such as the hundreds of millions of people who do not have government IDs, bank accounts, government benefits, permits to exist, build, farm, hunt, procreate, emit CO2, and more. Like I said, if you have not read Agenda 2030 or the UN Agenda 2030, I highly recommend you do, especially Goal 16. But basically, they summarize it, Goal 16 in a nutshell, which includes about a dozen individual targets, also offers some other important hints as to the real agenda behind UN's latest 15-year plan for mankind, more like 1-year plan. The goal itself is listed as promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Now that might sound good on the surface from the UN, but just what are they really talking about? That might sound nice to the untrained observer. UN documents almost always use innocent-sounding language developed by PR experts and marketing gurus to conceal the real agenda by using the word sustainable everywhere. However, within Goal 16, not to mention the equally dangerous 16 other goals for humanity, which are what? Population reduction, Operation Depopulation, are contained multiple troubling provisions. One of them is what? Promote the rule of law at the national and international levels. That is actually in the document. Where else have I heard the rule of law? Oh yeah, every president of the United States has talked about the rule of law, martial law, and the New World Order. Yet, according to the SPLC, according to them, even talking about the New World Order or being anti-government makes you a terrorist and deems you a terrorist. Interesting, even though our government talks about it. Who exactly would be making this law at the international level is not explained, though UN Chief Ban Ki-moon offered a clue when he claimed the UN, which is widely ridiculed as the dictators club, which it is, was actually the parliament of humanity. That's a joke. Goal 16 also includes a target to broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. New World Order. Are you starting to see and read between the lines? I hope so. When the UN says developing countries, it means mostly autocratic regimes ruling over poor countries like Venezuela, Africa, Asia, etc. And when it says global governance, it really means global government, as countless globalists have explained. So put simply, Goal 16 is a call for a more powerful system of global governance with more power for what? Who? Third world dictators. New World Order, socialism, Bolshevism, Marxism, communism, the whole isms by the Jewish cabal. Now, I could go on to read more of that document in detail, but I highly recommend you read this one on your own because it's very, very helpful. I'll leave a link for it below. And it tells the real agenda, what's going on with these globalists. But I want to turn your attention to global research and what they said about ID cards. And mind you, this was reported back in 2009. So what, 6, 7 years ago? But basically it says electronic ID cards have made alarming progress towards becoming universal around the world. Already over 2.2 billion people, or 33% of the world's population, have been issued with smart ID cards. Now mind you, this was in 2009, folks, so you can only imagine the progress that they've made in the past 6.5 years. And if you don't think that it's way more, you better think again. And also, if you don't think that it's becoming biometrics for worldwide, oh, that's exactly what they're doing. Of those, over 900 million have biometric facial and fingerprint systems. On present plans, over 85% of the world's population will have smart ID cards by 2012. And of course, now that it's 2016, it's most likely 99.9%. Most of the remaining population won't have escaped. Largely, they are already enrolled in earlier generation ID systems, often in repressive states such as Burma. Why am I bringing all of this up, and why am I talking about this at such a time like this? Because all of this relates to what? Mind control. It relates to what? Agenda 2030. It relates to what? Losing and stripping away of your rights, being constantly surveilled by Big Brother. Why? What's the agenda for all this? Because you could be deemed a terrorist, because you could be deemed a domestic threat, because you could be deemed a terrorist. And if you are, where are they going to put you? Into these FEMA camps. For what? To get rid of you. That is the agenda. And like I said, they're trying to do every little thing they can to surveil you more, take away your guns, take away your rights, and put you into these FEMA camps. And like I said, this is a worldwide scheme going on. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if all these ID cards or biometrics, if they all become mandatory by 2017. I wouldn't be surprised if all the banks by next year start implementing all of this stuff. And then what? After they implement it, oh my goodness, now there's a bank glitch, and because of these biometrics, oh no, now there are hackers. Oh no, now there's a CME. Oh no, now there's an EMP. Oh my goodness, now we have to combat this threat and send in the military through martial law to fight this threat of terrorism. If you don't think that that's the agenda, oh, you better think again, because that's exactly what is going on. Like I said, I highly recommend you come check this stuff out yourself because it's really important and it's really vital now. Like I said, I really hope that you see the agenda for what it is and see how bad things are getting and see just where we are in time. Like I said, any day now, all they need is one more false flag. All they need is one more Sandy hoax to start and trigger martial law, to start and trigger these race riots and race wars. They only need one more Trayvon Martin, and here we go. But I hope you're starting to see the agenda. Like I said, I'm going to do a follow-up subsequent video on biometrics and the real agenda behind them and how they're going to be used for these FEMA camps and how they're going to be used in America specifically. So please stay tuned to that. But if you already haven't, please seek Yahuwah with all your heart and his true son, Yahusha, that all may be well with you. Because I'm telling you, folks, things are about to get ugly. It may look sunny now. The birds may be chirping right now. But in a couple of years from now, all of that is about to change. You can believe that. But hopefully this will update you all and keep you updated. This is Truth Unveiled. Shalom.